Welcome back to the Buddhist Audio Bookshelf YouTube channel. Today, we continue our reading of Meditation by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, also known as Geoffrey DeGraff. We deeply value your support. Please like and share this audiobook to reach a wider audience, allowing more people to benefit from its wisdom. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, ensuring you receive immediate notifications as we upload new content. Together, we can spread the teachings of meditation and mindfulness, fostering a community of enlightenment and inner peace. Thank you for being part of our journey to make these profound teachings accessible to all. Let's start today with reading. Creativity and Play. October 4, 2004. An important part of learning how to meditate lies in learning how to play with your meditation. For example, when you're focusing on your breath, you want to learn how to play with your breath. To understand why, look at what you do when you're playing. You're trying out new things, you're enjoying the fact that the mind can create something and can think of new ways of doing things. Look also at the different approaches to playing. Some games are played without rules, but a lot of games have rules. In fact, the more rules, the more fun the game is, the more of a challenge. When you're playing with the breath, there are certain rules. The satisfaction comes in learning how to master the rules, play within the rules, and yet still play well. When you win at this game, you're winning out over your defilements. You're winning out over greed, anger and delusion. But in the meantime, the important thing about playing is that what you're doing isn't drudgery. It's fun. Researchers have found that people whose work doesn't challenge them, doesn't inspire them, are the ones most likely to get Alzheimer's because the brain isn't engaged. Playing requires intelligence. It develops a certain kind of intelligence, precisely the kind of intelligence that we want to develop in the practice. It's not the intelligence that simply memorizes things and, as one of my professors used to say, vomits them back out on an exam. It's the intelligence that sees problems and can work with them. It sees problems that other people didn't see, and can also see connections that other people didn't see. How a lesson you learned in this part of the practice can be applied to that part of the practice, and it can test to see if the connection has any practical value. That's the kind of intelligence, the kind of playing we're talking about. After all, what is the Dhamma? It's a set of strategies for gaining happiness, given the fact that there are certain laws governing the way action gives results. The laws are a little complex, like the laws governing turbulence in water. They're complex but not mechanical. That's what makes them challenging, like taking a boat through rapids. And the purpose of the practice is what makes you want to rise to the challenge. After all, it is your happiness at stake here. When you come to the practice, you already have certain strategies for becoming happy. Our whole sense of self is just that. A strategy. You learn to identify which things are worth looking after, to see that the well-being of certain things is more productive of happiness than the well-being of other things. Having a sense of self also teaches you to deny yourself certain things now, so that you get better results in the future. It inspires you to practice. It inspires you to get skillful. That's a positive side of the sense of self. It also reminds you that you're responsible for your happiness, that you can't sit around and simply expect it to come to you. That's another positive side to the sense of self. And in the practice, we're encouraged to think in that way. This is why we chant the passage on being subject to aging, illness, death, and separation, for that's the predicament in which we find ourselves. If you didn't have a sense of self, you wouldn't see it as a problem. If you have an immature sense of self, you wouldn't have any idea of how to go about solving the problem. So your sense of self is an important strategy, but remember, it's just that, a strategy. If you dig around to find anything of lasting value that's worth identifying as, yes, this is myself, if you look at it carefully, it starts dissolving away. You can use that sense of self as a strategy when it's useful, but after a certain point you have to start taking that strategy apart, because there's a more subtle strategy, the not-self strategy, that leads to a more subtle happiness. But in both cases, if you can learn to play with these concepts to see exactly how far they're useful and where they're no longer useful, that's when the practice really seeps into you, because the things you play with are really close to your heart. What is your heart? On the one hand, it's the ability to fabricate, and on the other hand, it's the ability to experience the pleasure or lack of pleasure that comes from the fabrication. And right there is where you're going to look for awakening. Right there is where you're going to look for the deathless. Right in this ability to fabricate and in your sensitivity to how much your fabrication is leading to happiness. The path is something you fabricate, so learn how to play well with the path, within the strictures, the rules, formed by the laws of causality. As with any game, you've got to stay within the rules, but within the rules you find that there's a lot of latitude. What kind of meditation object works best for you? That's something you've got to find out by playing with the different objects of meditation and learning to see which object you enjoy playing with most, the one you keep coming back to, because it sparks your imagination. Ajahn Fuang once told the story of Ajahn Kongma complaining to Ajahn Lee, "How can you meditate on the breath? It's just in and out, in and out. That's all there is to it." And Ajahn Lee said to him, "If that's all you see in it, then that's all you'll get from it." Ajahn Lee saw a lot of other things there. If you read his Dhamma talks, you'll see that he continued exploring the breath all the way up to the end of his life. He was always finding new ways of looking at the breath, new ways of playing with the breath energy, new strategies of conceiving the breath energy to help the mind settle down quickly and comfortably, and have it stay there for long periods of time. To play this game, you have to see the wandering mind, the curious mind that wanders around getting itself in trouble, as a problem, but you've also got to see the curiosity as a potential for helping you with the path. You can use it to explore the breath, to work with the breath in different ways to get the mind to settle down, to get it engrossed in the present moment. And what's more engrossing than playing with some things? You can play with them for a while, and you lose interest, for you've taken them as far as they can provide entertainment. But with the breath you can keep exploring here, exploring there, and then as you get more intimate with the breath you finally get more intimate with the processes of the mind. The thinking, the directed thought and evaluation. Play with those, see how subtle they can get, see what level of well-being they can give, what level of gratification they can give in the present moment. To begin with, try different ways of adjusting the breath. Sometimes all you need to do is think and the breath will change. Think, comfortable breath. Think, full breath. You don't have to do anything else, just think that thought, maintain that thought, and see what happens to the process of breathing in the body. Or, if you want, you can play with your focus. Instead of focusing on just one spot, try to focus on 2 spots at once. I personally always find that riveting. One spot can be in the middle of the head, the other spot can be down in the body, say, at the base of the spine, and think of a line connecting the two. Try to be aware of both spots, all at once, all the time. When you can maintain that double focus, the mind doesn't have any other hands to latch onto things. One hand is holding on to one spot, the other hand is holding on to the other. Your hands are full. So there's a lot to play with, a lot to work with here in the present moment. Ajahn Fuang would often say, try this approach. If it doesn't work, try something else, in the same way a coach would say, well, if that way doesn't work, try this, to encourage you to experiment, to judge the results, to start thinking on your own. If you try one approach and it doesn't work, there may be other approaches you can think of that will work. It's important that you engage the inventive side of your mind as you meditate, learning how to use it, so that it's not just wandering off in abstract imagination, but so that it's actually applied to what's going on right here, right now. Put it into play as part of your practice. What we're doing is learning where true happiness comes from. True happiness is not going to be dull, so keep your interest up, keep your expectations up. And this requires a sense of play. There are certain challenges that you're bound to run up against, and the element of play provides the side of you that's up for the challenge. How about this? How do you get around this problem? How do you get around that problem? Play wouldn't be fun if there weren't rules you run up against, certain facts of life you run up against, and you find them challenging. So you've got this mind that's creating suffering for itself. It's busy concocting things all day long. See that as a challenge. How can you take that process of concoction, the way the mind randomly fabricates this, that, and the other thing, and turn it to better uses, so that it can concoct the path that leads to true happiness? That's the challenge we've got here. We use the breath, the in and out breath, the breath in the nerves, the breath in the blood vessels, the breath energy that goes up as we breathe in, the energy that goes down as we breathe in, the energy that's always coming up the spine as tools in responding to that challenge. We use the things we learn about the mind as we stay with the breath, as ways of responding to that challenge. We get directions from the books, we get directions from teachers, but a lot of the insight that's actually going to liberate us comes from experimenting with this approach, playing with this idea, experimenting with that strategy on our own, seeing what works, what doesn't work. If it's not working, what can you do to adjust it so it does? The curious, inquisitive side of your mind is what's going to lead to discernment. The people who aren't inquisitive are the ones who get stuck in concentration and don't want to move. Or they blindly want to follow a method where everything is spelled out for them, but all they get is pre-packaged meditation product like the packaged foods that contain so little actual food that they have to be labeled as food product. But if you're naturally inquisitive, if you can make a game out of learning how to bring the mind to settle down, then once the mind is settled down, it'll naturally want to understand this, understand that, understand the processes of what you're doing. That's insight. So these are qualities you want to bring to your meditation. The ability to play, to respond to challenges, to be inquisitive, to find something here in the present moment that engages your imagination. And then you apply your imagination to a genuine problem. The fact that you're causing yourself suffering right here and now. This means, 1. Being able to imagine yourself not causing suffering, and 2. Imagining approaches that might get you to that goal. Experimenting with different ways of breathing, different ways of conceiving the breathing, different ways of focusing the mind, different ways of asking questions. There's a lot to play with here. And as long as you're fully engaged, you're bound to make discoveries. This is called the quality of citta, or intentness. The intentness that comes when you're really absorbed in something, when you're really engrossed in something, when you find that what you're doing gives you satisfaction, the satisfaction of learning how to master a problem. You've got this very creative mind, so how can you use it so that it doesn't create problems? How can you use it to find those areas of experience where there's no creating going on? Not out of dullness. I mean, even dull people create things all the time. This is what the mind does, it fabricates things, but they don't get engaged in trying to do it well. What we're looking for instead is to see if there's a dimension where there's no creation, and yet there is total happiness. How do you find that? To some extent you follow instructions, but you've also got to have the attitude of give this a try, give that a try. If you don't learn how to try things you've never tried before, never imagined before, you're never going to find anything new that you haven't experienced before. That's why the element of play is so important. Adolescent practice. October 25, 2003. If you don't think the idea of rebirth is scary, think of having to go through adolescence all over again, all the awkwardness, the embarrassment, all the problems of adolescence, high school, dating, asserting your independence. We're always glad that we've gotten past those things. But when you come to meditate, it's like going through adolescence all over again. When you start out, you're given a set of rules to follow. That's like being a child. Don't do this, don't do that, do this, do that. And for a while the rules work. But then there comes a time when, if you're going to make the meditation your own, you've got to test the rules. That's adolescence, which is why it's difficult, because sometimes the rules are good rules that can carry you all the way through adulthood, while other rules are best put away now that you're no longer a child. Sometimes the problem is that you had a childish understanding of the rules, and, as you grow up, you've got to change that understanding. So you've got to sort that all out. No wonder it's an awkward time. The same goes with meditation. You're told, focus on the breath. And in the beginning you're often told, don't meddle with the breath. Just let it come in and go out at its own rate. You may get the basic idea that the less you interfere in the present moment, the better, the more passive you become, the better. But that makes it difficult to integrate meditation with your life. Are you going to go through life totally passive in every situation? That doesn't work. It's like a walking death. So you've got to test the rule to see whether it's the kind of rule that says, before you cross the road, hold on to somebody's hand, or the type that says, before you cross the road, look both ways. Check the oncoming traffic first. Holding somebody's hand is a rule specifically for children. When you grow up, you don't need to follow it anymore. But the rule about looking both ways is a good rule to follow whether you're a child or an adult. So, the rule about not meddling with your breath. Which kind of rule is that? It's a holding the hand kind of rule. Meditation teachers often feel that people brand new to meditation will probably mess up their breath if they try to control it too much. In order to avoid that, they tell you not to get involved, to be as passive as possible. But as you gain more experience with the breath, you don't need to hold on to the teacher's hand anymore. You have to look for yourself. You have to experiment with the breath. Otherwise you'll never get a sense of how much subconscious molding of the breath is still going on, down under the surface of your consciousness. You'll never get a sense of what input you're putting into the present moment. That's crucial to the meditation, for only when you see it are you in a position where you can try to refine it. So you have to go through that awkward stage of messing with the breath too much, making it too long, making it too short, using too much pressure to change the breath to fit it into what you think might be a good mold. Or when you find something good, you tend to hold on to it well past the time when it's really worth holding on to. Or you force the breath into different parts of the body where it's best not to force it. These are issues you have to learn through experience, through making mistakes. You have to go through the adolescence of your meditation to get a sense of what's just right. That's where you begin to reach maturity, to develop finesse in your meditation. But to gain that finesse, that sense of just right, you have to go through the awkward stages doing it wrong, learning how to recognize it for wrong, and because of the awkwardness, we tend to avoid them. But there's no way you're going to get out of your childhood and into your adulthood as a meditator unless you go through these stages. So, when you work with the breath, keep two things in mind. One is that you're going to experiment with the breath to see what feels good right now. The other is that you also have to look at the way you're experimenting. You watch both the breath and the mind as it's dealing with the breath. And there are no hard and fast rules here. You have to feel your way. This is why the path is a gradual path. The Buddha once compared the path of practice to the continental shelf off of India. There's a gradual slope and then a sudden drop, like the continental shelf off the east coast of the United States. We all look forward to that sudden drop, but, as the Buddha says, you first have to go through the gradual slope before you get there. Sometimes our approach to meditation is simply hoping for the sudden drop to come, thinking that if we can make ourselves as still and passive as we can in the present moment, that will open a space for grace to drop on us. In other words, we're waiting for the accident of awakening to happen, but it doesn't happen that way. You reach the drop by taking the gradual slope. In other words, as you get more and more sensitive to what you're doing in the present moment, your input into the present gets more refined until you finally get to the point where you really can let it stop. But you have to go through many, many layers of intention first, for it's only through gradually developing skill in this area that you can really sense the most subtle forms of intention. This is why the activity of developing skill in the way you deal with the breath is not a distraction from vast openness of awakening. That's not the case at all. True awakening comes through the process of getting more and more Sensitive to what you're doing it with more and more refinement, until the ultimate layers of refinement can be seen and abandoned. So this focus on being skillful is a preparation. It's what gets us to the sudden drop of awakening. Otherwise, how are you going to develop your sensitivity? If you don't develop your sensitivity, where are you going to get the discernment that leads to awakening? It has to come through this process of being willing to make mistakes, of being patient with the gradual process. We're an impatient nation. We want things to happen right away. We look at the past and say, "Oh, those people didn't know anything. They had to go through this long, involved process because they didn't understand the quick and easy way to get things done." And yet so often the quick way to get things done may yield quick results, but not lasting results that might not be good over the long term, that might actually go bad. And meditation is one of those areas where time is required. Patience is required. You've got to invest the time and attention needed to develop a skill. You're getting to know the breath. It's like getting to know a person. As the Buddha said with regard to that kind of knowledge, you have to be observant and willing to put in a fair amount of time. Only then can you gain a sense of familiarity. Think of yourself as becoming friends with the breath. In any friendship there's got to be give and take. There are going to be awkward moments, ups and downs. But if you stick with it, with the good-heartedness needed to weather the downs, and the powers of observation to know when you've made a mistake, to admit your mistakes, then the friendship can grow. That's when your friend can start revealing all of his or her secrets. And the breath has lots of fascinating secrets. There are lots of interesting things to find out in the energy flow of the breathing. You can start seeing how the breath affects your feelings, exactly which experience is a breath experience, and which experience is a feeling experience, feeling pleasure or pain. As you really look into these things, you begin to see that you've often drawn the lines in your body and mind in the wrong places. For instance, the aggregates of form and feeling. The actual movement of the energy is form, the sense of pleasure or pain that goes along with it is the feeling, and it can be extremely fleeting. When you see how fleeting feelings are, much more fleeting than even subtle sensations of breath, that rearranges your notion about how you've been living your life. You realize how much of your life you spent chasing after pleasant feelings, and only to see more and more clearly how fleeting they are. So as you really look into this process of breathing, there's an awful lot to see. If you're willing to stick with the ups and downs of that gradual slope, you find that there's always something to do, something to learn. If you're sitting around waiting for awakening to happen, it gets pretty desensitizing after a while. Putting yourself into a dead, dull mood, saying, "We'll just wait here long enough and maybe it'll come." You get so that you no longer look at what you're doing. So the end result is that you're actually desensitizing yourself to a lot of the stuff going on in the mind. You try to hide it from yourself, hoping that, if I hide it well enough, then the enlightenment will be fooled, and it'll come like a child trying to fool Santa Claus. But if you work with the breath, each breath coming in, noticing what kinds of feelings it gives rise to, what you can do to make it a more pleasurable breath, you're engaged in a process that makes you more sensitive. And what is discernment but heightened sensitivity? We often think of discernment as trying to clone our minds into seeing things the way the Buddha tells us to see them. But that ends up just adding one more layer of conjecture to our ignorance. When he tells us to look for the inconstancy and the stress in things, he's not telling us to come to the conclusion that they're inconstant and stressful. He's telling us how to develop sensitivity. Can you sense really refined levels of inconstancy? Can you sense really refined levels of stress? What happens when you do? This is what the meditation is designed to do. As you discover those more and more refined levels and take them apart to create a greater sense of stability, a greater sense of well-being in the mind, you finally get to the point of equilibrium where everything opens up. You fall into what they call the stream, the point where there's no input into the present moment. You know this for sure because you thoroughly sensitized yourself to every kind of input the mind has had, every little discussion, every little agreement it's made with itself, even the sublinguistic communication going on in the mind. You've become more and more sensitive to that, to the point where it stops, and you're no longer doing anything. This is where the path takes over. The path actually does the work from that point on. It opens you to the deathless. This is why it's called the stream, because there's a sense of current pulling you along without your having to do anything at all. But to get to that point, you've got to do a lot of doing and be very sensitive to what you're doing, so you can know for sure when there's really and truly no intention in the mind, and when it only seems that way. So this little exercise here, of adjusting the breath, evaluating the breath, that's the beginning of discernment, the beginning of insight into the three characteristics of inconstancy, stress, and not self. It's crucial to the practice. It's the stage where you're not just obeying the rules for children. You're actually getting a sense of how the rules really work, and of which ones apply to you as a mature meditator. And even though it may be awkward going through this adolescence of testing things and tripping over your mistakes, nobody else has to know about the mistakes you've made. The important point is that you actually learn from them. Even though it may be awkward, that's how you grow up. No mistakes are fatal. January 2003. Our minds are pretty chaotic systems, which is why following the middle way is so difficult. It's so easy for a chaotic system to get knocked out of equilibrium, to veer off to the left, to veer off to the right. Staying in the middle is difficult, it requires a lot of balance. So it's no wonder that when psychologists describe the workings of the mind, they tend to use fluid mechanics as their main analogy. In other words, the mind acts like water. The way water swirls around and forms eddies, the way it gets pushed down here, goes underground, and comes out over there. Sometimes it builds up into huge waves. I was reading the other day about enormous waves, called rogue waves, that suddenly form out in the ocean. Things come together just right, this little wave adds on to that little wave, and all of a sudden they build into enormous rogue waves that flow through the ocean, and then after a while, mysteriously dissipate. It's the same with the mind. Sometimes rogue waves come crashing through the mind and you wonder where they came from. It's easy for tiny little things to set them off. This is why we have to be careful in our practice. Don't regard the little details or little distractions as totally unimportant. Ajahn Mun used to say that it's very rare that a whole tree gets into your eye, but sometimes just a little sawdust can get into your eye and blind you. Sometimes the little things are the ones that set you off, so you have to be careful. On the other hand, though, you have to be confident that even if the mind does get knocked off balance, you can bring it back. Otherwise the practice would be full of fear all the time, afraid of tipping off too far to the left, too far to the right, toppling upside down. There's only one way of learning what the balance point is, and that's through experimenting. And you can experiment only when you're not afraid. So you have to develop the confidence that even when you do go far off the path to one side or the other, you can pull yourself back. There's always that new opportunity in the mind to give yourself a fresh start. In this way you can experiment and gain a sense of where the balance is because you know that no mistakes are fatal. You come back and you put yourself on the path again. You fall off, well, you put yourself back on the path again. Ajahn Mun once said at another point, it's normal for people to go off on the side. You get stuck on the right side of the path looking at the flowers, sniffing the breeze, or on the left side on the path where you're stuck in the mud. But you can extract yourself from both sides. This is why we have techniques in meditation. This is what they're for. They assume that you're going to go off on either side, and so they give you paths for bringing yourself back. When the level of energy in your mind is too strong, your mind starts bouncing around like a ping pong ball. There are calming practices. When your energy level goes weak, you start getting bored, nothing seems to interest you, nothing seems to be worth doing. There are practices for energizing you. Think about your motivation while you're practicing, and that can help get you going again. And then there's the factor the Buddha calls analysis of qualities, which means really looking carefully at what's going on. Often we get bored with the meditation because we've grown sloppy, we're not really paying careful attention, and nothing new seems to be coming along. Look very carefully at what you're doing. Look very carefully at each breath, and you'll begin to see things you didn't notice before. This is why mindfulness and alertness are qualities appropriate at all times. Remind yourself why you're on the path and then be very careful to look at what you're doing. Be very precise in watching what's going on. You begin to see that there's a lot going on here in the present moment. After all, you're creating a world here in the present moment, and that's not a simple activity. There's lots to observe, lots to notice, starting with the simple building blocks, the breath, and the mental qualities that are called directed thought and evaluation, the ones that do all that chattering in your mind. You direct your thoughts to a particular topic and then you think about it, you evaluate it. You say, this is this, and that's that, and this is good, and that's bad. So you take those very basic building blocks and you put them together in a new way. Instead of chattering about things outside, you direct your thoughts to the breath, you evaluate the breath. Then there are the final set of building blocks, feelings and perceptions. Feelings of pleasure, pain, or neither pleasure nor pain, and the labels you put on all these things. You apply all those to the breath as well. So you've got all the building blocks for your experience right here, and instead of building them into elaborate worlds, you very consciously don't. You build them into something very simple. A focused state of mind. Now, simple doesn't mean easy. As I said, there are all these other currents going on in the mind. But as you keep coming back, you're coming back to these building blocks on a simple level. Keep it basic, but be very observant. One of the reasons things don't stay basic in the mind is that we're so good at whipping things up out of these building blocks. It's like a meringue, or whipped cream. You take a little tiny bit of cream, and you whip it up into this big blob of whipped cream. There's a lot of air in there, a lot of fabrication going on. So what you want to do is keep things basic but be very observant, because you've got a lot of tricks up your sleeve for creating something out of nothing, making mountains out of the tiniest molehills. So, keep it on the level of molehills, very simple, very basic, and keep your eye out for those other tricks. That's where things get fascinating, realizing how you deceive yourself all the time. Sometimes it comes down to a basic level of dishonesty in the mind. One part of the mind is very good at lying to another part of the mind. So you can start asking yourself, who's actually fooling whom here? Where's the curtain, the window shade, the wall that allows one part of the mind to fool another part of the mind? Or, does it depend on the other part of the mind's willingness to be fooled? There are lots of interesting political maneuvers going on in the mind, so watch out for those. Fortunately, the best way of dealing with them is to keep things basic. Just refuse to play along. When things do come up in the mind as you're trying to get it to settle down, try to cut them off as quickly as possible. When a thought comes into the mind, you remember this person, you actually see this or that person's face, just say, goodwill for that person, and that's enough. You don't have to get involved in the stories associated with those faces. And in the beginning you don't have to trace those faces back. How did that image come? Just let it go. This principle of keeping things simple is what enables balance to come more and more easily to the mind, for you can see the little movements that otherwise might set things off. It's what they call the butterfly effect. A butterfly flaps its wings in Hong Kong and a jetliner, as a result of the change in the currents of air, later crashes in Texas. So keep things simple so that you're aware of those little butterfly flutterings in the mind. But fortunately, when the mind crashes, it's not like a Texas airplane, it doesn't die unless you let it die. You can always pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and move on. This is a good thing to remember in the practice. There's the story of King Ajatasattu. He killed his father and later felt a lot of regret, but there's a tradition that he's going to become a private Buddhist someday, even though he's got some really bad karma to pay off first. Even Mara, who's the figure of temptation in the early Buddhist texts, there's a tradition that he, too, will someday become a private Buddha. So no matter how much your mind may seem ready to crash, or if it has already crashed, You can always take heart, pick yourself up, because there's always new karma, always new things you can do, with every moment. No mistakes are fatal. When you have that confidence, you can experiment in the mind. Find out how much effort is too much, how much effort is too little, how too much activity in the mind gets you all stirred up, how too low a level of energy starts you falling asleep. These are all questions of balance, and they can be answered only by experimenting, testing for yourself, finding out for yourself what's too much, what's too little, what's too far to the right, what's too far to the left. With the confidence that no matter what your mistakes, you can always correct them, you can always learn from them. That's the important thing. Don't view a mistake as a really bad thing that you have to make up for afterwards. Use it as a learning experience. When you approach everything as a learning experience, then no meditation is wasted. Every meditation becomes an opportunity to learn. It's just a question of whether you take that opportunity or not. The Buddha talks about the bases of success in meditation. Concentration based on desire and right effort, concentration based on persistence or energy and right effort, concentration based on intentness and right effort, and concentration based on the mind's powers of analysis and right effort. And he talks about how important it is to reach a balance in all these factors, because your desire can be too strong, too weak. Your persistence can be way overboard. Or way too lax. The same with intentness and your powers of analysis. Sometimes they go way overboard and sometimes they dribble away into nothing. There's only one way to learn balance in all these things, and that's through trial and error. Yeah, I know. We here in America are all busy people. We want things to be packaged easily so we can get the most out of them and move on to our next whatever. But the practice isn't like that. There isn't a next whatever to move on to. This is the most important issue facing the mind right now. The fact that it's creating suffering for itself. Its every action is aimed at happiness, but it's creating suffering for itself. That's the big problem in life. Only the practice can solve it. And the practice is an activity that gives results only when you're willing to be patient and experiment and learn from your mistakes. So that's what you've got to do. But take heart. Even the Buddha made mistakes. Big mistakes. 6 years of self-torture. All the noble disciples have made mistakes. It's just that they were willing to learn from them, and they didn't let the mistakes get them down. A light in the darkness. May 2002. Let the mind settle down in the present. Sometimes you can use the word let. Other times you have to force it because the mind sometimes has its moods where it's not willing to settle down. It's got all kinds of other issues to think about, all kinds of other agendas, and now it's got a whole hour when it can think of those things that were suppressed in the course of the day. Because other things captured your attention. Now they can start popping up to the surface, so you need tools to keep them from getting in the way. One effective tool is simply the desire to be still. For example, when the mind is tired, it really wants to rest. In cases like that, all you have to do is give it a good resting spot. Your main concern then is to make sure it doesn't fall asleep or drift off into a zone where it's not really aware of what's going on. If the body's tired, do some good deep in and out breathing to make sure there's enough oxygen in the brain. Then gradually allow the breathing to settle down to a more comfortable rate. Once it's comfortable, spread that sense of comfort to fill the whole body, and then try to stay very consciously aware of the whole body. Don't let your awareness shrink. There are other times when the mind has more energy to think, and in that case you've got to cut it off in other ways, partly by explaining things to it, partly by having values that will cut off the thoughts. All too often our values go in the other direction, encouraging thought, especially with the idea we have that if we figure out things beforehand, we don't have to do the work. So many of us come to the meditation with that attitude. If you read enough books, if you think things through, reason things through ahead of time, then you won't have to do all the work. You just settle down, insights will pop into the mind, and the job will be done. But it doesn't work that way, because a lot of the insights we're trying to gain deal with the way the mind functions, and you can't really see the functioning of the mind until you wrestle with it to know its ins and outs, to know where the tricks it plays on itself are coming from. And you also have to develop some good retorts. Sometimes there's a conversation, an argument going on in the mind. Part of the mind wants to think about this, think about that. Well, you've got to argue with it, give it good reasons for not going there. And keep the reasons short and sharp, for otherwise you'll get drawn into endless conversations. Remind yourself that knowledge, at least the knowledge that we're looking for in the meditation, isn't something that comes from thinking things through. Ajahn Suwat had a good line on this. He said, "It's like darkness. You don't like the darkness, but you can't attack the darkness. You can't scratch a hole in it, you can't rip it, you can't tear it. You have to light a light. The light will then take care of the darkness. All of the other things we might do to try to grab hold of the darkness or rip it away just don't work." It's the same with the mind. We can't think our way out of ignorance. We have to watch so that we can give rise to discernment. The discernment here is precisely that. The awareness that comes when you really watch things carefully, when you observe what's going on in the mind. So you have to set up the right circumstances. Again, it's not a matter of thinking things through. The proper preparation for the meditation, the part that explains it beforehand, simply tells you how to set up the right situation, and then you just have to watch. A good analogy is with a hunter. The hunter does what he can to prepare to go out hunting, to get all his weapons in the right order. Then he goes out and has to sit very still. He can't decide beforehand that the rabbit's going to come along at 2 p.m., so that he can come back at 3 and have dinner before dark. The hunter goes out and all he can do is sit there very quietly, and yet at the same time be very watchful. Whether the rabbit comes at noon or 2 or 4 or if it doesn't come that day, the hunter still has to be very watchful all the time. He can't let his attention slip, can't make a noise, and can't schedule events beforehand. He can't, through the force of his will, make the rabbit come at a particular time or at a particular place. The hunter just does the best he can to set up the right circumstances along the path where rabbits ordinarily come, and then he sits still and watches. The same with the meditation. You get the mind as still as you can and then you have to watch. That's the only way you're going to get any really new insights into what's going on. Actually, as meditators, we're better off than hunters because the mind is constantly sending out little signals. It's always giving us something to catch as it deals with this, deals with that, makes this choice and that. The problem is that we're not still enough to notice these things. We're not attentive enough. We don't focus our attention in the right places. We don't ask the right questions. As a result, we don't see, even though everything's happening right here before our eyes. So you have to be very, very careful, very, very still, and then ask the right questions. The Buddha gives instructions on this. The questions that surround the Four Noble Truths. Where is their stress? Where is their craving? When is mindfulness present? When is it absent? Can you see these things? When mindfulness is present, how can you keep it going? When it's absent, how can you give rise to it? These are the questions he has us ask about the present moment. Aside from that, he tells us to put everything else aside, all your other concerns, all the other distractions that come along, and focus on the real issue at hand, which is how to deal with suffering, how to deal with stress. Once that issue is dealt with, everything else is taken care of. I recently received a letter from a doctor who was claiming that modern psychology has made an advance over Buddhism, in that Buddhism deals only with the problem of suffering, while modern psychology deals with suffering and also gives meaning to life. I don't think he understands the depth of the problem of suffering. Once you really eradicate suffering, what remains to your life, the meaning of what you want to do with it, is very clear. And it will vary from person to person. But the big issue facing everybody is digging out the roots of suffering. Once those roots are dug out, then the question of meaning is no longer a problem. Why does the question of meaning bother us? There must be some suffering, there must be some stress surrounding it. We look into it. Why does there have to be a meaning to things? What's the suffering that comes from there not being a meaning? Dig into it. Look into it. And if that's too abstract or too subtle, focus on where you do see the suffering, where you do see the craving, because developing your powers of observation is a process just like anything else. You work from the crude to the subtle, from the gross to the refined. You don't sit there and say, "This issue is too crude for me. I'm going to wait until the subtle ones come." You have to handle the crude ones first, the blatant ones first. Get practice with them, and then your sensitivity, your awareness, will grow more and more subtle. You have to start where you are and accept where you are as your starting place. You can't say, "I wish my concentration were better. I wish it was the way it was years ago." You have to put those thoughts aside and say, "Where is it right now? What are my abilities right now? What issues are presenting themselves right now?" If you get used to handling what's here right now, you're focused on the right spot. You're developing the habits you need. After all, this is a skill we're working on. It's not an intellectual puzzle where you can just think things through. Skills require dedication. They require time. They require commitment. There's an interesting story they tell about choosing candidates for the brain surgery program at a famous university. As you can imagine, everybody who applies to be a brain surgeon has to be smart, but not everybody who's book smart is going to succeed in the program. So the question is how to weed out the people who are not going to succeed. They found that one of the most useful questions to ask the applicants is, "Could you tell me about a recent mistake you made?" The candidates who say, "I can't think of any mistakes I made recently," are immediately crossed out. The ones who say, "Oh, yeah, just the other day I made this mistake," are the ones who pass the first question. Then the follow-up question is, "What would you do differently if you had another chance?" The ones who showed that they had already thought of this question and had come up with a few alternatives were the ones who were accepted into the school. The people who are going to succeed are not the ones who have everything figured out beforehand, they're the ones who keep learning all along the way. The same principle applies to meditation. You have to learn to put your mind in a learning mood all the time, because only then will you see the things that you didn't see before, that will light the lamp that will drive away the darkness of ignorance. So, keep on watching. The Knife of Discernment. April 2002. The mind feeds on its moods and its objects, so you've got to find something good for it to feed on. We have the choice. There are all kinds of things you could focus on right now. It's up to you to choose the right place to focus, the right place to feed. So look around in the body. Where is a comfortable place? At what spot can you watch the breath clearly and comfortably? Try to stay in touch with that place and stay in touch with that sense of comfort as well. After watching it for a while, you'll find that certain ways of breathing give rise to a feeling tone that feels good, feels healing. Try to maintain that feeling tone. This may require adjusting the breath now and then, because the needs of the body, as the mind begins to settle down, begin to change. The breath can grow more and more still, more and more refined. The less your mind jumps around thinking about this, that, and the other thing, the less oxygen you need. So, allow the rhythm of the breath to change as is necessary. The important thing is learning to ride that feeling tone, the way you'd ride a wave with a surfboard. Getting a sense of when to lean a little to the left, a little to the right, steer here, steer there, to maintain your sense of balance. As for whatever other issues may come up, remember that you're choosing to feed right here. You don't have to feed on anything else. There may be a little voice in your mind saying, "Look at that. Watch this. You've got to worry about that, worry about this." Just keep reminding yourself, "No, not right now." Your current priority is to develop a good, strong foundation so that you can feel secure in the present moment, so that no matter what happens, you've got a place where you're safe. As you feed here more and more often, you find that the mind gets stronger. When it gains a sense of nourishment and inner comfort, you can spread that sense of comfort around the body so that it gets more encompassing. If there are parts of the body you can't spread it to, that's okay. You don't have to focus there yet. Focus on the areas where you can spread that sense of comfort, where it can seep through easily. Allow yourself to be bathed by it, surrounded by it, so that the mind has more and more good food to feed on. As it gets stronger, it can begin to look at the other areas that are more problematic, because now it doesn't have to feed on them. This is why pain, for example, has been such a big problem. We keep trying to feed on it. It's as if you have a good kitchen with lots of good food stocked up, but you go rooting around in the garbage pail. So get the mind well fed with this sense of ease, this sense of well-being, and then when you turn to look at pain, you can see it in a different way. When you look at something as food, as something to gain sustenance from, you're going to see it in one way. When you look at pain as food, it's disappointing. It's lousy food, and yet when the mind is hungry it feeds on whatever it can find. But when the mind isn't hungry, you can look at the pain with pure curiosity. Let's look into this. What is this? Let's try to understand it. Your whole attitude toward it changes. Remember, the Buddha said, try to comprehend pain. He doesn't say, snuff it out. One way of comprehending it is to see how much you can use the breath to deal with the pain. Another is to see how much your different attitudes toward the pain will change the way you experience it. Experiment around the pain to see what happens, and particularly to get a sense of the difference between the physical pain and the mental pain. The Buddha compares pain with being shot by arrows. Physical pain is like being shot with one arrow, but then on top of that you shoot yourself with another arrow. The anguish you build up around the pain is totally optional. When you've got a body, there are going to be pains. Even the Buddha had physical pains after his awakening, but the difference is that he knew how not to shoot himself with those unnecessary second, third, fourth, and fifth arrows. And as it turns out, those are the ones that really hurt. Those are the ones causing the problems. But you can't just go marching in and say to yourself, okay, you, out. Stop. Stop shooting arrows. You've got to learn to see where the dividing line is between the physical pain and the mental pain. You do that by experimenting with the breath, experimenting with the labels you put on the pain, asking yourself questions about the pain, and sometimes the strange questions are the ones that ferret out the strange attitudes you've built up around the pain. For instance, you ask, what shape does the pain have? It sounds like a strange question, but when you pursue it you find that your imagination has actually given the pain a shape. What happens when you don't give it a shape? How does the pain move around? Is it moving around on its own or is it moving around because you're pushing it around? These are things you have to learn through experiment. It's only through experimentation that things begin to divide out on their own. In other words, if you go in with preconceived notions, the dividing line has to be here or there. It turns out that that's not the case at all. You're forcing your ignorance onto the pain, which, of course, just makes it worse. So you've got to learn how to experiment. How do changes in the breathing change the pain? How do changes in your concept of the pain change the pain? How about changes in your concept of how the mind relates to the body? Is the mind in the body? Is the body in the mind? Where in the body is the mind? These may seem like strange questions, but you begin to realize that the mind on an unarticulated level actually does think in those terms. And a lot of our basic assumptions of where the center of our awareness is, where the pain is in relation to that center, and how it affects that center. These play an important role in how we experience the pain, and how we make ourselves suffer unnecessarily from it. So you have to experiment and test things. But first you've got to get the mind settled down with a sense of well-being, for otherwise it's going to be sneaking little bites of the pain, feeding on the pain, and then not liking what it eats. That just complicates the issue, makes it impossible to analyze things and separate them out. To gain this foundation of well-being takes time. You've got to be patient. Keep working at it again and again and again. You can't say, I've done this X number of days, or X number of weeks, or X number of years, I should be beyond that. You just keep working at it as long as necessary. The concentration is the part of the meditation you can do, the asking of the questions is something you can do, but the insights that actually give you that aha, those you can't do. Those come as a result of the other actions, but they're not something you can intend. You can intend to get the mind to settle down, you can intend to learn how to ask those questions, but when the results come, that's something you can't determine in advance. Just make sure that you've got the causes right in terms of the stability of your gaze, the sense of well-being you can fall back on whenever you need it, and the quality of appropriate attention, learning how to ask the right questions. That's what you do in the meditation, that's what you intend in the meditation, and when these things fall together just right, the results will come. To ferret out the difference between the physical pain, the pains of the khandhas, the pains of the aggregates, as opposed to the pain of attachment, craving, and clinging. That's a distinction you see in the doing. You catch yourself in the doing, you see how the doing affects things. This is something you can't figure out in advance. But when the distinction becomes clear in the doing, then you've cut the mind away from those attachments and cravings. When the Buddha said that his job was done, this is what he meant. There were still pains in the body, there were still issues in life, but the mind no longer had to suffer because of them. That's where awakening makes a permanent difference, once and for all. We hear over and over again that, because of the principle of impermanence, even awakening must be impermanent, but that's not true. The Buddha didn't say that everything is impermanent, only that conditioned things are impermanent. And even on the conditioned level, it's possible to make irrevocable changes. This is why training the mind is so worthwhile. With practice, we can cut through the fetters that keep us bound to suffering, so that they'll never bind us ever again. One of the images they give in the texts is of a palm tree with its crown cut off. It'll never grow any further. Another image is of a carcass of a cow. The butchers take off the skin, cutting all the little tendons and all the connective tissue, but then, no matter how they try to put the skin back on the cow, it's never connected in the same way. It's right next to the cow, but there are no connections because the knife of discernment has cut them once and for all. The Treasure Hunt. August, 2002. When you meditate, try to think of it as a process of exploration. Don't have a lot of preconceived notions about what you're going to find. If you go into it thinking that you're going to reprogram your mind, well, you could reprogram your mind into seeing almost anything. If you believe firmly enough that if you saw iridescent clouds all around you, that would be a good sign, you could make yourself see iridescent clouds. If you believe firmly enough that if you saw the whole world as blue you'd find true happiness, then you would make yourself see the whole world as blue. But that's no indication that the world really is blue. So instead, you're asked to explore. The Buddha doesn't give a lot of descriptions of the goal, although he does give a few hints, but he gives a lot of detail on how to find it. It's like a treasure hunt. He says that if you go into the next room and you look in this particular way, you're going to uncover something of value. And he gives you a couple of tests for determining whether the object you find is the valuable object or not. Is it subject to change? Is there any stress? Is there any sense of possession? If there is, it's not what you're looking for. But as to what precisely it is that you're looking for, he gives only a few hints. So what we should focus on is the process of what we're doing. Think back on his awakening. There were 3 knowledges that preceded his attainment of nibbana. Knowledge of previous lives, knowledge of beings passing away and being reborn in line with their karma, and then knowledge of the 4 Noble Truths. Those first 2 knowledges were not all that certain, there was still an element of possible doubt. Visions of previous lifetimes don't necessarily mean you actually had previous lifetimes. You can see people passing away and being reborn in line with their karma, but does that mean that it really happens? You can see all kinds of things, but it doesn't mean they're true. The Buddha realized that the way to test those visions lay in testing that issue of karma, what people do, in the present moment. This is one thing you can know directly. You can know directly what you're doing. When you focus the mind, you know you're focusing the mind. When the mind settles down, you know it's settling down. When the mind wanders off, you know it's wandering off. These are things you really know here and now. When you experience suffering, you know. When you experience a lack of suffering, you know. So those are the two issues the Buddha focused on. The feelings of suffering and the knowledge of actions. The second knowledge suggested that there was a connection between the two, so the Buddha decided to see if this was true. These two are very certain things. When you're suffering, no one can convincingly tell you, that's not really suffering, you're not suffering. Other things you might know can be shaped by the rules of the languages you've learned, but your experience of suffering is pre-linguistic. You know it more directly than anything else. At the same time, when you do something, you know you're doing it. So the Buddha wanted to see if people's experiences of pleasure and pain are related to their actions. For his answer, he looked in the immediate present. What are you doing right now? He asked himself. Is there any relation between what you're doing right now and an experience of pain or lack of pain? The next question, when he saw that there was a connection, was, is it possible not to do anything? What happens then? So he worked to let go of the craving and ignorance that lead to action, that are involved in action, to see what happens then. In this way he was dealing with realities that are immediately apparent, immediately present. He was running an experiment to see. What happens when you do it this way? What happens when you do it that way? He wasn't dealing in visions, he wasn't dealing in mystical abstractions. He was looking at very ordinary things, the actions of the mind, and seeing what they resulted in. We're trying to do the same thing as we meditate here. That's where the focus should be. We're not just sitting here waiting for enlightenment to plop on us out of the sky. We're looking for an enlightenment into what we're actually doing right now. It's amazing how much the mind can disguise that from itself. This is a tendency we've had ever since we were little children. To hide our intentions from ourselves, because sometimes our intentions are not all that sociable, not all that admirable. We can find ways of justifying almost anything to ourselves, and in the process we learn how to be a little bit dishonest, sometimes not just a little bit, sometimes outrageously dishonest with ourselves. So when we're meditating we want to muster up some honesty and focus it on this issue here. Let's really get truthful about what's going on right now. We apply our honesty. This is not to say we're by nature either honest or dishonest, it's just that we've developed both patterns, and we try to take advantage of our skillful habits to uproot the unskillful ones. How do we get honest and clear about our intentions? You have to make the mind really still. That's why we're focused on the breath. We give the mind an intention. Stay with the breath. Don't move. Don't go wandering off to other things. And we give it a further intention. Try to breathe as comfortably as possible. That right there is an immediate exercise in the relationship between your actions and feelings of pleasure and pain. You want to develop that particular sensitivity as much as you can. What's important is the particular combination of the stillness of your focus and the point where you're focused, right at this issue of intention and its relationship to pleasure and pain. This is why breath meditation opens things up in the mind, for it's focused on the real issues. The Buddha once said that insight is knowledge of sankhara, fabrication, and fabrication comes in three forms. Physical fabrication, that's the breath. Verbal fabrication, the directed thought and evaluation that give rise to words, and mental fabrication, your feelings and perceptions. When you're focused on the breath properly, all these things are brought together. There's the physical fabrication of the breath, there's directed thought and evaluation directed to the breath, and there are the perceptions of the breath and the feelings that arise from how you deal with the breath. Everything you really need to know for awakening is right here. And what is the process of fabrication? There's a lot of intention involved in it, and that's what you want to focus on, because intention lies at the essence of action. The Buddha's genius was to realize that the things we need for awakening, the things we need to understand the problem of suffering in our lives, all lie right here. It's simply a question of bringing them together and giving them a really steady look so you can clearly see what's going on. What happens when you really focus your attention right here and don't let yourself get distracted? What happens when you develop your sensitivities in this area? What do you find? Ajahn Mahabua talks about his time with Ajahn Mun, saying that Ajahn Mun would give long Dhamma talks, sketching out the whole path of the practice, because at any one time, there would often be lots of different people coming to study with him, all at different stages of the practice. In order to cover everybody, he would start from the most basic levels of practice on up to the highest. And Ajahn Mahabua noticed that as Ajahn Mun was giving his Dhamma talks, he'd get to some really crucial parts of the practice, really important discoveries that would move you from one level to the next, and he wouldn't describe them in detail. He'd just move on to the next level. He'd set up the problem and then bypass around it. This had Ajahn Mahabua mystified for a while. Then he began to realize that if you explain everything in a lot of detail beforehand, people would come to those points bringing a lot of preconceived notions. Those notions would get in the way. So the important thing about listening to the Dhamma is that the Dhamma points you. In fact, the word dharana, the word they use for a Dhamma explanation, literally means pointing to. It points you to the places where you should look, gives you instructions on how to look, and then it's up to you to see. When the Buddha would give instructions for meditators, he wouldn't say go do insight, he'd say go do jhana. In the course of doing jhana, you'd have to develop tranquility and insight as well. The insight would become your own because it's something you discovered. You noticed things that you didn't notice before. What else do you think awakening would be? It's not that the skies open and some god comes down bearing a message, or some light beam comes down from the outside. And it's not something you can clone from what you've heard about other people's awakening. It's simply a matter of looking very carefully at what's already here, looking to see what happens when you get your focus really well tuned, when you get it steady. You develop all the skills you need to see clearly, learning how to look, learning where to look, but the actual seeing, when it becomes clear seeing, that's something you can't will. The looking will point you there. If you keep looking, you'll see. So, look carefully. There's a lot to awaken, to hear, a lot to understand, to explore, to discover. It's simply up to us to want to discover it enough, and to apply ourselves to what needs to be done. This is the end of this episode. We will seeing you on our next episode. In accordance with the Buddha's guidance, we stress the significance of disseminating wisdom extensively. Today, we've converted this extensive 1,000-page book into an easily accessible audio format. It's now your turn to contribute to this noble cause. By subscribing, liking, and sharing this content, you actively participate in the spread of these teachings for the benefit of others. Together, we uphold the tradition of sharing knowledge and mindfulness for the greater good of humanity. Join us in this endeavor, and collectively, we can bring about a profound impact in the lives of many.